All right, everyone. So welcome back to the show. I actually have like a good friend of mine, Andre. I think he was the second guest when I first started my podcast already like 5 years ago. So he was like the very second guest, and I did one before him with him as well on another podcast. And I wanted to invite him back on. And unfortunately, I just talked to David Murphy about this topic as well, like a few days ago. And it's kind of sad that it's like 2024 and we still have to convince people that, putting a lot of chemicals as synthetic biocides uh, on food is a bad is a bad thing, and unfortunately there are a lot of like online influencers kind of downplaying even the popular accounts downplaying the importance of organic food because a lot of times they don't really even understand real organic practices or that there are various levels of integrity in organic as well and saying, things like you've been speaking out about and kind of opened my eyes to, old, outdated methods of toxicology, like the dose makes the poison. You even hear popular accounts like Dr. Eads, which is sponsored by the American Beverage Association. So the guys that make, soda and everything. So I don't know if he does know, but he's purposely like not talking about it, or he just doesn't seem to know either. But I just wanted to invite you back on for those that are interested in improving their health and kind of reducing their toxic load. And I'll let you take over here, Andre. Go for it.
Yeah, look, it's great to be back, and I'm really pleased that you are bringing up this issue because it is critically important at the moment, particularly now with the push for the, how do you say, laboratory and GMO non-meat products. And they contain very high levels of various toxic chemicals. But getting back to the dose makes the poison, that argument. And what we hear all the time from so-called experts is that you'd have to eat a truckload of vegetables to be poisoned. What they're talking about is what we call the acute dose, how much you take and you'll die within 2 weeks. But the real thing about when we're talking about these poisons is not we eat vegetables and we're dead within 2 weeks. It's the fact that they're causing the epidemic of chronic diseases that we're seeing in the Western world. So what we're seeing is this increase in type 2 diabetes, increase in heart disease, in whole range of cancers. We can go on and on and on with all these diseases that we're seeing. And as Americans age, virtually every American is on some sort of medication, in most cases, multiple medications for multiple chronic diseases. That is a sign of a very unhealthy food system. And the fact is that one of the leading causes of this are the multiple chemicals that we have in our food and environment. And we have thousands, not one or two studies, thousands of scientific studies showing this.
Well, can you, I guess let's break that down because there's a lot of confusion even with these so-called online guru experts, which surprisingly, actually, some of them do have a lot of education. Some of them are like MDs that also specialize in nutrition. But I find like even a lot of them don't, maybe because they've actually never been out in the field before or never actually, you know, grown an animal from start to finish or produce or anything of that sort. But a lot of them, like even they quote like a myriad of studies, like see how safe glyphosate is. Here's like 508 studies or whatever. But I don't even think they understand that like no one uses an isolated active ingredient out in the field on its own. So can you kind of explain a lot of the confusion around that?
The fact is, these experts have never read one of the independent peer-reviewed studies, otherwise they wouldn't be. What they're doing is mouthing the propaganda, the BS from the chemical companies like Bayer, Monsanto. They will say there's 580 studies to show it's safe, and so will the US EPA. the big trouble is they will not show you the 580 studies because they're commercial incompetence. When we can get access to them, and there's been access to some of them through various court cases, through discovery, other cases that have been leaked. These studies do not show safety, and in most cases, they actually show a whole range of chronic diseases, including multiple types of cancers. But we're seeing damage to the reproductive system, for instance, to sperm, to ovaries, to affecting our hormonal systems, our immune system. We're seeing it related to autism because it damages the development of the nervous system in children, and the brain is our biggest collection of nerves. So we actually can show physical damage. So when we hear these sort of statements, what you're seeing are people who they're essentially uneducated because they have never read one of those 580 studies because they can't. So myself, I've read many of them, and I've read, thousands of others. I now have a doctorate in environmental and agricultural sciences. I've written 2 books on it. I've written many scientific papers and chapters in scientific books. And I can say, and I will say this very clearly, there is not one published peer-reviewed study by an independent scientist, I mean, one who's not paid for, does not make their living from chemical companies. So a credible scientist without a conflict of interest. There is not one peer-reviewed scientific study showing that any level of any pesticide is safe for children. I want to repeat that. There is no evidence-based science to show that the smallest level of any pesticide is safe for our children. And yet, we are subjecting them to a cocktail of these chemicals.
Yeah, Andre, you probably know it better than I do too, but can you explain like a lot of the politics around even coming up with these studies? Because that's also important. Even if a person reads a study and knows how to interpret the data on the surface, they really don't know like the background story of how that study was conducted. Like you made it more aware to me that a lot of these, almost all of the studies are done in-house by the chemical companies' scientists and then sent to the FDA or regulatory agencies for approval and stuff of that sort.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is that the FDA requests a certain number of studies from the chemical companies, and they eventually get submitted. The issue here is they're not peer-reviewed. The gold standard in science is this, is that a study is done and then it's sent to a reputable scientific journal where other experts will look at it and see if there are faults or problems in its methodology, the way it's done. And they will make comments, and then it gets published and it's out in the open domain. So other experts, people like myself, can now look at it and go, how did that scientist or that researcher get that conclusion? What sort of methodology? That's the gold standard. There is no such standard with the regulatory body study. The regulatory body study. So there is no such standard with the industry studies that are submitted to the regulatory bodies like the FDA, and they're hidden. If I want to find out, how did they come to the conclusion, the opposite of the World Health Organization conclusion that glyphosate causes cancer? Where are their studies? They say there's 580 to say it's safe. Well, if you have 580 studies, wouldn't you put them out in the record to prove your point? You know, why are they hiding it? You know, it's the same thing when it goes to the court cases, and they go to the Monsanto Bayer court cases, and they bring their experts in to say it's safe. And they say they've got all the studies that's safe, but they won't go and provide those studies as evidence in a court of law to show it's safe. And then they complain when they get basically sued for billions, which they have been. You know, if they had the studies to show they were safe, why wouldn't they put them out if they could win a court case instead of losing billions? And it's a very simple answer. They don't have it. You know, their studies themselves are either rubbish or they show multiple amounts of harm from their pesticides. And that's not just glyphosate. We can go across the board with everyone there. And I will say it again, there is not one study that is the gold standard of science to show that these pesticides are safe for our children.
Yeah, and also like a lot of times they don't understand like the politics or the revolving door business of regulatory
Yeah.
agencies and corporations. I found like in certain cases there could be like a FDA director that might not want to rock the boat because they know when they, retire, they're going to go to industry and probably make, 10 times the amount per year they're making at a government position. So they don't want to ruin their connections. What's been like your experience with seeing that side of the industry?
That is one of the major areas of corruption, is the revolving door. So and it works both ways. So we quite often will see that one of the managers from the industry then will become the head of a department, a whole section, the one that is approving their chemicals. After the chemical or the GMO has been approved, next thing you know, that person gets promoted to be vice president of the chemical company, the GMO company, and others. And the way it works is the ones that are compliant, they can now get nice positions, be VPs or senior managers and earn big money. The others that don't comply, they have their careers destroyed, completely destroyed, their academic careers, everything. They go out of their way to make sure that they don't get employed, and they get attacked in the media, they get attacked everyone. You know, those excellent scientists like Tyrone B. Hayes and his work on atrazine, and they went out of their way to try and destroy his academic career. Lucky he was a fighter, but still, we see this across the board. You know, Seralini did and his colleagues did one of the best studies on long-term effects of GMOs and Roundup on rats. And they went out of their way to destroy his career, destroy his funding. They went and got the scientific paper retracted from the journal when it shouldn't be. In the end, he submitted it to another journal. It went through a second peer review and it's got published. And it still stands today as an excellent scientific paper, but they still attack him and attack that paper because they see it as a threat. And the other one too is you'll find a lot of these influencers and journalists directly paid by the companies. You know, they get so-called advertising revenue or whatever, however you like to call it. So they basically mouth off or sprout off what they're told.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't do any research. If they had done research, they wouldn't be saying what they're saying. The only research they've got is that their bank accounts look really good. It's corruption. And I will say it again, the system is corrupt, from the regulatory agents through to influencers and mainstream media and the journalists there. They get fed what to say because these companies are major advertisers, and they essentially they're advertisers and also major shareholders in companies like Google and big social media companies. So if I start posting on these things, I lose my account. I get thrown out. Or mild posts, they squeeze it down so that a scientific paper will come out, but it'll only go out to a limited little closed group of people where it'll have no influence, even though this is something out to every mom and pop, so they know what to avoid to look after their children.
Yeah, Dave Murphy, as I spoke to him, he had a good phrase for a lot of these influencers. He called them like industry parrots.
Yeah.
They just kind of quack and repeat like what the industry said. And like I mentioned, a popular one is Dr. Id's, sponsored by the American Beverage Association, according to Anthony. I got the story from, he's an MD, Anthony something. His last name starts with an M, but I forgot his last name at the moment. But anyway, it's like the ethics, just how could you take money being in the healthcare industry from someone that makes, soda, knowing that those companies know that most people don't have any health or nutrition education, and they know that most people can't control themselves, but they still make these products that they clearly know aren't like a single variable that contribute to all the obesity, but it's one of the variables for sure that contributes to a lot of the obesity. And I just find that there's something ethically very wrong being like a medical doctor. Your responsibility is to take care of the public and give them, the best information possible. I don't know the exact contract he has with these people, but then also take money from, like, you're a drug rehab specialist and then you're taking money from the drug dealers. It's like, how does that work?
Well, that's his job, and that's what he's trained in. The big issue here is they're the same companies. Bayer makes pesticides. Bayer also makes a huge amount of its money out of selling medications. And if you actually start looking who owns them and owns social media, it gets down to almost three international organizations: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And the three of them also have cross ownership. But you'll actually start going through the shell companies of Pepsi and Coca-Cola and the Google, and we can start just looking at all the big food manufacturers, McDonald's, so on. The big drug companies, vaccine companies like Pfizer, and you start seeing the names of these three companies just cropping up everywhere. So what's happening, say, in medical school, they weed out any people who start questioning the orthodoxy. They don't get to become doctors. They get failed. And I call it, I'm actually I've got higher degrees in adult education in universities, that I call this the regurgitation model of learning. They're the students, if they regurgitate back exactly what their professors tell them, they get the highest marks. If you question and you try to be innovative and do new areas, you fail. So you've got a whole breed of doctors, they know nothing about nutrition. They get 1 day of it in their 8 years before they, they know zero. All they know is this is the symptom and this is the medication you prescribe. They know nothing about natural health or other ways, of preventing diseases. There is no such thing as disease prevention. The big thing for them now is early detection. And the reason why they love early detection, because the earlier you detect it, it's not the cure. It's the longer people can be on medication, the more money that the companies make. That's what it's about. The definition of a chronic disease is that it is incurable. Look it up. And that's what we have as an epidemic of chronic diseases. So you've got people now, the majority of people at some point now are on medications for the rest of their life. And it's for these people, to cure these diseases is a terrible business model. A patient cured is a customer lost.
Yeah, and the sad part is it would be nice if all these symptom management strategies worked. Because the only issue, especially in America, and probably you see the same thing in Australia, they're like Americans literally right now are like mentally and physically the sickest humans in all of human history, but yet the most medically drugged out and just getting sicker. Like not just like the sickest humans on the planet currently, they're literally the sickest humans in all of human history, even if you take in all 28 plus human species that have come and gone over the millions of years.
We're the same in Australia, and in fact, in some ways, we're actually doing better than you guys. We're beating you guys in obesity. You
Well, if you
were
got to win, you got
always
to
a
win
guy.
in everything.
We were winning, taking you guys a slim plus. But it's the same. Essentially the same companies just dominate. The media dominate the narratives we get, and most people don't question it, or when we try to counter these narratives, we get hit now with disinformation and misinformation, even though in our case we've got good evidence-based science, that we get attacked. And that is the real issue at the moment, is just so hard for us to get the truth out.
Yeah, and a lot of times that's exactly what a lot of these influencers do. They're like, "Oh, you're not data driven, you're a quack or whatever." And they're like all the time when I mention like there's this one girl named Food Science Babe, and her whole entire account is like, "I'm a data driven nutrition researcher." But she doesn't even understand like just the basics, like I mentioned earlier, and that you made me conscious of many years ago at this point, that complete formulations are like never tested. And she's explaining data from that vantage point. And she didn't even know, I don't even think she knew, just by the way she's representing the data and the fact that I questioned her on like, do you even know that isolated active ingredients aren't even used in the field? Like for glyphosate, for example, she speaks heavily on how safe it is, et cetera, and how mothers shouldn't worry about high levels of glyphosate being found in cereals and other products, all that stuff. And I'm like, well, where's your data? She's like, oh, here's an industry funded study. I'm like, well, that only studies the active ingredient in isolation on its own. She's like, oh, where's your data? And then I list like probably 10 studies showing complete formulations are far more toxic. And then they just stop replying at that point. I don't know if you've probably experienced this a million times over at this point.
Look, exactly what happens then, actually, and that's it. And you'll probably never get interviewed by her again, because they don't want to be embarrassed. They're the experts, and that they don't want to change their point of view. Because if they do, the same thing will happen to them. They now will no longer be an influencer. They will be cut off. They'll lose their millions of followers, which is the money they make, that turns them rich. Their sponsors, which are the industry associations, which are funded, essentially billions being put out there into these groups all across social media and mainstream media. So we get relegated to the minor corners of social media and influencing. So, I don't know how big your following is, but compared to other influencers, you probably don't have the millions of followers.
No,
Thousands,
that's
maybe,
true. Yeah, that's definitely true.
in my case, years in social media, the biggest I've got is 7,000 followers in LinkedIn. And I have to be really careful there
Hmm.
that I don't, if I push the boundaries too far, they will ban me. I'll lose even that. Facebook is the same. So many people I know have been kicked off TikTok, Facebook, Instagram especially. We've got to be very, very careful what we say and try and know where the boundary is before the so-called fact checkers kick us off. And they're not fact checkers. If they're fact checkers, we wouldn't have issues because we actually do have facts. What they're checking is that we are contradicting the mainstream misinformation that they're trying to say is the truth. And what we're doing is called disinformation.
Hmm. Yeah, I think one reason that a lot of those accounts, although there are a lot of really like health conscious accounts too that go very
Yeah.
popular, but I think a lot of those like pro, it's okay to keep eating, chemically sprayed food. It's okay, stay on these myriad of medical drugs. They're scientifically proven to extend your life, et cetera, et cetera. I think their message is easier to accept by the vast majority of people because the vast majority of people, especially in the Western world, have normalized a life of mental and physical pathology. And it just peddles
Mm.
and markets more to that belief system because then it's kind of reinforces that the decisions they've made in life are actually the right decisions. Although they're completely wrong. A lot of these people just have to look in the mirror and just be honest about themselves. I mean, most people have to take like an entire bottle of Xanax and like 5 cups of coffee in the morning just to have enough energy and vitality just to wash the dishes, moreover, go to work. I mean, that's a normal way of life for a lot of people that they've accepted as normal.
And the argument was always used for, that chemicals and everything was safe, is that life expectancy was increasing. And up until recently it was, but, at the same time, while people were living longer, we could see the rise in chronic diseases. When we looked at, and people actually weren't really living that much longer. When we started looking at the figures, at the extension, what in the past kept down average life expectancy was high infant mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And when you factored that in, and you averaged it, then you didn't have the average lifespan of a community wasn't so high. But as we started using, it's essentially hygiene was
Mm-hmm.
the really important. It stopped at infant mortality. Life expectancy went up. But when we start looking at the lives of elderly people in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, very few of them had chronic diseases. There's a few here and there, that they had, some people had, but most people actually lived the 70s and 80s, quite active, quite healthy, and just passed away naturally in their sleep. That was the norm. Now, then what we saw is that life expectancy started to creep up, but this massive increase in chronic diseases. Yes, people are living longer, but the quality of life wasn't so good. But as of the last 2 years in US, my countries, as you just come out, now in Japan and countries in Europe, what we're seeing now is, for the first time ever, the decrease in life expectancy and an even greater increase in chronic diseases. So this is really catching up with us now. It's for the first time in 100 years, life expectancy is decreasing.
Yeah, and I would even argue like like 20, maybe even hopefully in 30 years from now, we'll look back at people will look back at us and like, man, can't believe they actually sprayed all that stuff on their food. Like, what were they thinking, you know?
Yeah. And look, I think some of the diseases that are really critical is, the increase in the rate of autism and other related sort of diseases in children like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and the bipolar schizophrenia spectrum. Now, if you have a look at that has just increased to shocking amounts, and it is still going up. Now, one of the studies that I was a co-author of with Dr. Nancy Swanson, we showed the strong correlation between the increase in glyphosate and GMOs and these diseases in children. And we used what's called a Pearson's correlation coefficient, which is where you look at the probability that one thing causes the other, because correlation is not necessarily causation. But when we use this coefficient to the probability that glyphosate and GMOs is not responsible for this autism epidemic was 1 in 10,000. Now, if that was a medication, and you got a peer-reviewed study like we did, it would be taken off the market under the precautionary principle. But thankfully, it's only a pesticide, not a medication, so we don't need to take it off. Now that and just rubbish the authors. After we published it, a very good study came out showing how the smallest amounts of glyphosate, not just Roundup, glyphosate, the active ingredient, the one that they say is safe, damages the development of nerve cells in humans. And so that the nerves don't build and don't make the connections. So, and it's the smallest amounts in diet or passing through the placenta into the unborn or through breast milk. And these are the times when the brain is actually developing in humans up until after puberty. They're critical times, and we're exposing our children to these and damaging their normal brain connections. The nerves are undeveloped, so they're not making the connections. If they're not connecting, the brain isn't working. And so we actually have the science, the clear science on that study alone, showing the damage to the developing nerves. It should have been banned, not just the cancer studies. That I just want to say one other thing too. We have the really good information that pesticides are the cause, but we also have very good studies now showing that we can, in many cases, reverse it by removing the cause, no longer exposing children to it, even if the damage has been done. The brain, we know, is plastic. We can still rebuild parts of it. Even in our 90s, we know we can do it. So changing to an organic diet, getting rid of all the toxic things in the environment. And we have so many cases where children now recover from autism. It's not a life sentence, and we can actually talk about so many chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes or the intestinal bowel diseases, heart diseases now, where if we remove the cause, the disease starts to heal. They go from being chronic and incurable to essentially acute and curable. Removing the cause of the problem, is logical. It's not rocket science. And we know what the causes are and start removing them, and we can undo this epidemic of chronic diseases.
That's one thing I found in the health field. Oftentimes, the health field, but also industrial agriculture, they're so addicted to symptom management practices. They can't see beyond symptom management. And sometimes, a lot of times, you get actually pretty smart people in the health field. But like I always say, they live in the swamp, but instead of just stepping outside of the swamp, they learn how to tinker and coexist in the swamp, just manage all the insults and the bacteria and stuff of that sort. But my model is like, dude, you're in a swamp. Why don't you just step outside of it and it'll become much easier to heal instead of continuing to live in there? My theory behind that is actually pretty much a lot of health professionals, almost all of them are just unhealthy themselves. And sick people can't make healthy decisions, or they wouldn't be sick themselves to begin with. And the average doctor, at least in America, has a lower life expectancy than the average US citizen, which is a complete train wreck, of health as well. It's like we're not comparing them to Olympic athletes, and they're still not able to match those basic standards.
Yeah, look, and the point you made is actually a really important one, is that the average doctor is actually more unhealthy than the average person. And in many ways, what they've done is normalized chronic disease. They see it as a normal part of aging. And because they see it every day and they've got it,
Mhm.
or their friends, and everybody who comes to visit them as patients has got it. And so they think this is what happens as you age. And then naturally you treat it with drugs to, not to cure it, but to treat the symptoms so you can get on with life. And that is basically, the model. It's their business model. So, if they start curing their patients, they wouldn't come back. And, so it's not what they do. They get no repeat business if everybody got healthy. And similarly with the drug companies, essentially that's who they work for, that's who they prescribe. What drug companies want are medications that people have to take for the rest of their lives. And that's what you see is mostly prescribed. For instance, we're running out of antibiotics now. We've got
Mm.
antibiotic resistance. Drug companies aren't really interested in making new antibiotics because you don't take them for the rest of your life. You just take them for 5 days or 6 days to get better, cured, and then you don't. So it's not, for them, they look at it and go, no, it's not a good business model. We're not interested, If the antibiotics they make and they sell the most of are the ones that they put into animal feed in the confined animal factories, because these animals are crowded together so closely that they're reservoirs for diseases. So they think feed them antibiotics, and there tons and tons of antibiotics goes into the system. So that's where they make their money. And of course, that's where also they breed all the antibiotic resistant genes to make antibiotics, not, how can you say they don't work so well anymore for us? And actually, they don't work so well anymore for the animals, but that's great. That means now you up the dosage, you sell more. This is all corrupt business. It's not about curing people, being healthy. We don't need to have antibiotics and animal feed if we looked after them properly, have animals not crowded together, but have them out in pasture, healthy
Yeah.
pasture, dressing themselves, and they're eating well, so they've got immune systems, they're not crowded together, they infect each other, and essentially, like at the moment, you've got bird flu. And what they do is they cull out the whole dairy, if it gets in the cows, all the chickens, they cull out millions of animals. And that's the wrong model. What needs to be done is you have the animals spaced out. Those ones that get sick, you let nature take its course, because those that survive are immune. They've got adaptive immunity. They're healthy, and then you got a whole population now that is totally resistant to bird flu. But we're doing the opposite, and we're going to, looks like to me that this is a deliberate, slow burn to make bird flu the next pandemic.
Yeah. Well, like I said, sick people can't make healthy decisions, or they wouldn't be sick themselves to begin with. So it totally makes sense. And I mean, regarding the aging question you mentioned, my grandmother grew up off grid her whole entire life. She never even like had a job or anything, and she lived to 87 without going to the doctors a single time. And all
Yeah.
she ate was basically just legitimate, like 100% organic food, zero processed food. She just drank teas and water mainly her whole life, and had low intensity dynamic movement all day, just taking care of the self-sustaining ranch. And that's it, no drugs, no crazy joint issues. She was doing everything herself into old age. She didn't have like someone to hire to help her or anything.
But we all have stories like that now. When you go back and look at our past and our families and what it was like in the past. And I just want to say, our future can be like that again. And this is for me why eating organic food is just so important. We remove the cause, which is a poor diet, and poisons in the diet. The thing is about organic food is that we don't have the poisons, and we have the research to show that. I know they try to say things like, organic uses pesticides. It does not use synthetic pesticides. It uses natural compounds, and those compounds we know biodegrade within 24 hours. So there is no toxic compounds. Some don't biodegrade. For instance, some of the copper sprays, and I've heard organic being attacked about copper. The amount of copper in organic is actually beneficial. If you have a multivitamin, it has copper. Copper is essential for your hormones to work. If we have copper deficiencies, we get ill, we die. Copper is what stops us from going grey until really late. So you see younger people with grey hairs, you know that they actually got copper deficiencies. And you can actually fix that up by fixing up the copper deficiency. So this thing that, copper is bad is rubbish. It's essential. And the fact is most conventional foods now, the way they're grown with synthetic fertilizers, have something like less than half the mineral value than they had in the 1940s. So nearly everybody is on a deficient diet. Copper, I'll give you an example, magnesium is another. We can go on and on and on. You just cannot get them through the normal conventional diet. People say, you don't need supplements or multivitamins, you just eat a balanced diet. Well, and I've heard that, and I challenge them. So where'd you get that from? And they go, I read it. So why don't you do something? Look at what the recommended minimum daily intake, what you've got to do to not have a deficiency, and then look at what is in food and how much you have to eat to get the minimum daily, and you can't do it. You should try that, Eugene. You can get all the tables out, do it for yourself, and see if with the average diet, can you get enough of all the key minerals, vitamins, amino acids that you need to stay healthy? You can't, but with a conventional diet. With organic, you can. We've actually got the higher nutrition. But people say, there's no evidence that organic has more nutrition. We have the studies, multiple studies. Once again, that's a misinformation. That's bullshit that gets put out. Organic has better nutrition, but most importantly, we're not poisoning our children. So you start putting children on a full organic diet, good healthy diet, and take away the junk food and the processed foods, you can reverse so many of these diseases. And you'll see, things like autism, bipolar, ADHD, they'll all improve. Asthma, that's another thing that's epidemic. And all these other sorts of diseases we're seeing in children, we can start improving them. And also at the other end of the table, as people start aging, we can turn around many of these diseases. For instance, we know how to turn around type 2 diabetes, for instance. It's treatable. And heart disease and so many other chronic ailments we can treat through diet and using organic food.
Yeah, and I think when a lot of these kind of influencers, which themselves actually look very sickly and bad in my opinion, so like what they're doing clearly isn't working anyways for themselves, so I even take their health advice altogether. But a lot of times when they cite like, oh yeah, it's just fact, it's just basic observation, look at these people and like they look freaking terrible, it's like, why would you ask like a broke person for financial advice, same exact thing. Like, why would you ask a sickly, unhealthy person for health advice? It's kind of crazy to me. But a lot of them do say, like you mentioned, oh, organic, there's no nutritional difference. But then you look at a lot of the studies they quote, they're just comparing monocrop industrial organic with monocrop industrial organic or industrial normal farming, So of course you're probably in those two situations not going to find like much difference, because both of them are just industrial operations. One is just masquerading as organic basically, but they never compare like true biodynamic or even like wild crops. The fact that there's also a long transportation period, they're picked before they ripen a lot of times, so they're going to lose just a lot of nutrition from there. And then on top of that, the whole entire, I mean, this is like obvious for you, but the whole entire just genetic manipulation over hundreds and thousands of years, favoring more sugar content versus actual phytonutrients, for a thinner skin, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Yeah, look, the thing is, what they do is they cherry pick. And the thing is about nutrition, it can vary from season to season. Carrots grown in the same field, same variety of carrots, can have different levels of nutrition year after year. So you can then pick a study where, a conventional carrot has more nutrition than an organic one, But so what we have to do is what we call meta studies, where we look at hundreds of studies over many, many years to get out what we call the statistical noise, that variation that can happen within a field between 2 years. Start averaging it out over many years, you remove that. Start adding in more studies, you start to get more consistent data. So when we look at these bigger meta studies, where maybe you look at 380 comparison studies, organic comes out consistently higher in nutrients. Particularly, you want to talk about the phytonutrients, the antioxidants that we know protect us against chronic diseases like cancer and heart disease. And we know how protective they are. And we also know that they're curative as well. You start putting these into your diet, we can start healing. That's the whole thing. And stop thinking of these diseases as chronic and start saying we can heal it and bring ourselves back to good health.
Yeah, one of the comments that they try to kind of attack me back on, they're like, well, if all those chemicals were destroying the soil, how's the crop still able to grow? And I'm like, well, you can grow crops in hydroponic containers too, without like any soil whatsoever, and it's going to look just fine, on the surface. But it's just like empty water, basically, for the most part, with a hard shell.
And look, that's exactly what, when we're talking about nutrients, that's exactly what it is. You're buying water with a hard shell. and color. Looks nice. You know, things like lettuce now, you know, are flavorless. You know, if you get the earlier varieties of lettuce, you know, they've got that bitterness. They've removed it. Oh, bitter is not good. Bitter are the phytonutrients. The
Hmm.
more bitter it is, the healthier it is, the more antioxidants, the more curative it is, you know, the more it prevents diseases. We've removed those really important compounds from plants. Those compounds, by the way, plants put them out as protective compounds to basically protect themselves from pests and diseases. And we've evolved with plants, and when we eat them, we get these same protective effects from it. So that's why, you know, having the right sort of plants in your diet is important. But similarly also, you know, having meat, milk, eggs that come from animals raised regeneratively on pasture. They're eating all those phytonutrients and they've also got them. So we start looking at the difference in organic milk or, you know, regenerative grass-fed beef. And it is so much healthier because of the pastures, what they eat. You know, the old thing, healthy soil makes healthy plants, makes healthy animals and people.
Yeah, this is all like just basically, in my opinion, like common sense, but it's just like a complete vacuum in like a lot of the holistic, in a lot of the health fields. Another thing is too, when I feel like when you're like a health provider, you need to look at health like very holistically, even from a global perspective. You know, a lot of times they're so myopic. It's like, oh, you know, this is sprayed here, and it's like in such a small dose. Although, like you mentioned in your book, Myths of Safe Pesticides, you know, I don't even think a lot of these people know that there are 600 plus chemicals on the market that have like a non-monotonic dose response. So the lower the dose becomes, it actually becomes more toxic. But then on top of that, to me, I'm like, okay, you become healthy when your environment is healthy. Like if you're living near Chernobyl, you know, you're probably going to have some health consequences. So let's just make sure we don't have like Chernobyl. And then it'll be much easier to attend to your health. And the worst you're going to have in your life is probably these emergency health scares, like a car accident or something like that. But at least you're not going to have all these chronic diseases. I mean, to me,
Exactly.
that's
That's
just
right.
like, I don't need to go to school for 12 years to come up with that idea. It's crazy.
Yeah. But I fully agree with you. And it gets down to prevention. It is more important, you know, than early detection, and we can prevent it. And the logical way to prevent um, these issues is to remove the cause of harm. And, you know, it's not rocket science. You know, it's a really simple thing. We know what the causes are. We have the information. We've had it for a long time. We have the scientific publications. You know, you remove that and then the problems disappear. Or firstly, you don't get it. That's what you want. And particularly, we want to prevent our children from getting it. And having good organic diets is the cheapest, most cost-effective way, much cheaper than buying medications at a doctor for the rest of their life, to give our children, you know, the best start in life without, you know, having to suffer chronic diseases. And then where people have diseases, the same rule applies. Remove the cause of the disease, what's causing the harm. Remove it, and then people can start to heal. You know, we have immune systems. We naturally heal. You know, but if we're always being harmed, the body never gets a chance to heal, and then it just gets worse and worse, and finally gets out of control, like cancers and things like that. But if we, you know, just remove the causes of harm, and we know what they are, that all the various toxins in our food, in our environment, remove that and life changes. And it can change very quickly, particularly for children. We know within days, when we're testing their urine, we can see it clear up from many of the chemicals, and they respond so quickly.
Yeah, and a lot of these influencers, they also kind of came at me with this one too. They do say like, um, by supporting organic, you're like an elitist. Not everyone can afford organic and stuff of this sort. I mean, this is a really long conversation, but in short, because I want you to do mainly all the speaking here, but in short, at least in America, the average American spends a minimum of 8,000 and on average between 8,000 to 16,000 per year, every single year on non-essential expenses like eating out, alcohol, those new jeans, the subscription services. And that's already way more than that's required for a 2,000 calorie a day diet, which is about what the average person needs to live and function well. So again, these influencers are too myopic. They're not seeing the broader picture that society has normalized mental and physical illness, and their core priorities are all out of whack because a lot of these corporations have brainwashed these people into believing what isn't important is important, and what is important is actually not that important.
Can I say, and the good example of that is this.
Mm-hmm.
In the States, in my country as well, Europe now, the average family spends more on this than on food.
Yeah, and for the
Just to
listeners,
show.
guys, this is going to be an audio. He's pointing to his iPhone.
Yeah. So sorry, yeah. I was pointing to my iPhone that basically that more gets spent on that every month than gets spent on the food budget if you start looking at the breakdown in health. Also, when you go into the supermarket, you look at the shopping trolley, and what's it filled up with? It's filled up with all the sodas, filled up with all the processed, highly processed junk, what we actually call it empty calories. It's calories, essentially sugar, with no nutrition. There's no vitamins, there's no minerals, there's no phytonutrients in it. And it's toxic with chemicals. If you turned around and just bought 100% organic and basically like your grandmother used to eat, fresh fruit and veggies and meat and eggs and milk, and just unprocessed, and ate cooked it yourself, so you got whole foods, your bill, if you buy 100% organic, is less than the bill buying all these junk processed foods. You won't need to eat as much because you get you have you're sated, you're full. Whereas with the junk food, people aren't full. They're getting all the sugar, but you're starving because you're not getting the minerals and vitamins and phytonutrients and amino acids. And so, they're still hungry and starving. They're eating more, becoming obese, putting on all the fat from it. But if you do blood tests, these people are deficient in most of the essential nutrients. You buy the organic food, you don't need to eat that much because it's so dense in nutrients that you get sated. You're getting the complete mix of healthy things. And so I want to argue organic is actually cheaper. Not when you look at it, the cost of how many dollars per pound, but when you look at your total cost for the family, it's cheaper. But where it is cheapest and the best value is you think about that the trolley of processed foods with all that toxic junk food is setting up children for a lifetime of ill health and damage, and then medical bills, drugs, all that money. That is too expensive.
Yeah.
That is far more then children are healthy, and that you don't need all these drugs, you don't need all the medication, visits to the doctor. They're having you don't have all the psychological problems and all the other issues. The children are developing normally, doing what children should do. Organic food is the healthiest and cheapest lifestyle.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into the podcast. I'm curious, have you ever been confused by the labels in the grocery store? In Yevgeny's book, he demystifies the difference between caged, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised meats. He also covers how to avoid GMOs, source high-quality water, fish, supplements, and other related topics. It's a beautifully illustrated, non-technical read that comes with a comprehensive video series and other extended learning materials. Jump on Amazon and check out the book titled Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide by Eugene Trufkin. Now let's dive back into the podcast.
Yeah, and regarding the indirect costs, which actually really directly impacts you, the average overweight American spends about $11,000 a year on medical expenses. So if you count let's say on the low end, 8,000 for non-essential expenses, then 11,000 for medical expenses, you're already at 20K. That's way more money than you need to buy even great pasture-raised meat, eggs, even take up hunting if you want, and just have wild game, have get now a lot of great biodynamic farms even offer delivery services for fruits and vegetables, even have that delivered to you. You don't even have to drive to them with that much amount of money spent. And then on top of that, 80% of personal bankruptcies in the US are due to health issues.
Yeah.
80%.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is in Australia, but that's crazy.
We have basically all Australians pay a certain amount of tax, and then we get a certain amount of medical care from the government. However, it doesn't properly cover it, and the government can't cope. So there's really long waiting lists to get treatment. So then when people have to pay for it, it's the same thing again. And the costs are just horrendous. They go up to the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's the same thing again. People end up in serious debt. And then if they can't handle their debt, they're in bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's also, remember, the indirect costs of looking terrible, feeling terrible all day, every day, then passing these belief systems down to your kids, and they live the same exact way, and then copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste. It's and regarding your shopping cart thing, this reminds me of actually a few months ago, I was helping a friend with a construction project, and he was kind of in a poor neighborhood building a place there. And I went to Heb. It's kind of a lower end grocery store here. And then I was walking around, and I was putting steak in there, and then just frozen vegetables, something I can make really quick in a mini oven he had there. And I see everyone's shopping cart is again full with 80+% of it is junk, chips, processed this, soda, processed that. And I was behind one obese couple, and they spent close to $250 on their shopping cart. Meanwhile, I spent for the same amount of calories, basically spent around $60 just on steak and all these vegetables, and just got bottled water. And then I walked up to them and said oh, how come you guys spend so much money on all this? And they're just huge, and they're oh, we don't like to spend money on, we think it's more expensive to buy organic and real food. And I showed them my bill, and this is the problem when society normalizes mental and physical illness. They still couldn't connect the dots. I'm dude, can you not see that you're mentally and physically unwell?
Yeah. The thing is, they're actually addicted to it. And it's just the same as if they're addicted to heroin. And we actually have the studies. It's just so hard for them to break out from it. Because they're so addicted to it, that if you presented them with what you cook, the steak and veggies, they would not want it, and they'd still want to go back to their sodas. They need, and their chips. They need that fix of essentially it's a combination of sugar, these unsaturated omega-6 oils, seed oils, and empty carbohydrates like chips. With that combination is as addictive as heroin, and they're getting their fix. And that's where it gets really, really hard to get people off it, and why so many diets fail, because they're going through terrible withdrawals. And can I say that's also deliberate, because where these foods started to dominate the supermarkets and the 7-Elevens and all the stores, when you walk down all the aisles, that's all you see now. And that's the dominant food. That happened when the tobacco companies got in and bought all the major food companies, and they used their addiction model that they used with tobacco to with food and junk food. And if you have a look, and you look at the history of that, and this is exactly what's happening. So those people, it's really hard to blame them or even change them, because they are, with them, how can I say, they go a few hours and they're hanging out for their fix. Their body going through withdrawals, and that's their life. And what you saw they bought there, I bet you if you went back two days later, they've got the same again.
Yeah.
So that is a real issue then, is actually getting people, it's not just educating them, it's getting them to withdraw and change over. And that is just so difficult and painful for them, because they are physically addicted.
Yeah. And then
That's
unfortunately,
why,
they also have like a belief system that's kind of like a mind virus, that's
Yeah.
leading to a life of behaviors consistently. Because remember, the irony is, like, a lot of people are like, oh, it takes a lot of work to be in good shape and a lot of money or whatever. The irony is it actually takes a tremendous amount of work, effort, and money to make yourself obese. I mean, think about it, like how much money you have to spend on processed food. You have to dedicate consistently, day after day, going to those fast food places, going to that supermarket and buying processed food versus like a steak or something. And you got to look in the mirror, hate what you see, but then kind of reframe the negative into the positive in some sort of distorted, sick way to keep yourself on this life of mental and physical illness. That takes dedication, in my opinion, like a lot of it, and a huge tolerance to pain that I don't even have.
Yeah. The other one always sort of amazes me is the fact that, they don't want to exercise because it's too much effort. But you think about the amount of weight they're carrying. If you or I actually walked around with that amount of weight, say on a backpack, we could hardly move, and we'd be absolutely exhausted. So they are really, just by walking around and the small amount of movement they're doing, they're absolutely stressing out their body more than an athlete. Their hearts are just boom, 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 boom. They're out of breath because they can't move their hearts fast enough to put oxygen into the body. So they struggle. So that's one of the reasons why they won't exercise. But it's also a reason why most of these people, they really don't live much past their 50s now. Yes, they start life young. They end up with so many diseases, heart failure, type 2 diabetes, and then the other thing we know that they tend to get is a whole range of bowel cancers as well. And
Yeah,
these are
then
prevalent with.
also the indirect things of it's just harder to date, There's a lot of studies that show they get paid less at work as well because people perceive them as lazy. Or in Japan,
Yeah.
they're even a lot more hardcore about this, and they actually find companies that have obese employees. So every year they do kind of like a waist circumference. I mean, it could be a little better than this, but they do like, I believe, a waist circumference measurement. And if anyone comes above a certain number, they fine the company and require that company to pay that person's kind of uh, re-education classes on how to basically maintain a slim physique.
Okay, I didn't know that, but that sounds maybe as a health measure is quite interesting. Although, I suppose from my point of view, I'm a great believer in personal choice and bodily autonomy. And in the end, I don't know if we should be forcing measures on the people, because generally speaking, once you do that, we find that the bureaucrats usually force the wrong measures.
Well,
And
I mean, there are countless studies that show you can't really force anyone into a life of health and wellness. I think one good solution too, and I think the Western world can do this so easy, especially ones with universal healthcare programs, which are extraordinarily expensive and really don't improve the health of the nation too much, is take like a small fraction of that money and basically reinvest it in really I hate to use the word, but brainwashing kids from elementary school through high school on like the basics of like identifying real food, how to sleep properly, how to manage their central nervous system and stress properly, how to identify their core values and live by them, and to have nonviolent forms of communication, problem resolution skills. And just those basic things, which are so inexpensive, will solve the chronic health issues in and of themselves. This generation is gone for sure. But actually, the next generation can then have a chance of living a life of living just a normal life, not like a life of normalized mental and physical illness, because inevitably with a lot of chronic health conditions or obesity, it's actually a problem at the thinking and emotional dimension that leads to a problem at the biological dimension. So by tackling the biological dimension, you're just totally symptom managing, and managing symptoms only yields more symptoms over time. It's like, I don't need to go to school for like 50 years to know. It's like super basic.
I think one of the best ways, what you're talking about there is school gardens. I just love them, where kids are out, they grow organic food, they learn how to grow plants and raise chickens, and and then how to prepare it and cook food. I think that's probably one of the most incredible life skills. And through there, they learn the value of fresh produce. They interact with livestock. They interact with plants and nature, and they learn the skill of now preparing healthy food rather than buying junk food. And just that to me sets them up for life. I know in my case, the reason I love growing plants is at school when we went out in class and did the school gardens, and I just used to love it, and the ability to plant something and see it grow and nurture it and harvest it, to me, it's just such a wonderful experience. And I think if we did that with all children in all schools, it'll make such a difference to their health, but also their well-being, but also understanding where does their food come from. And, in those lessons, you also teach them about nutrition. We'll set them up for life.
Yeah, that reminds me, I was in a like 8-month wilderness survival course, and they had like some classes for kids. And it was a great contrast to see kids out there near the river learning how to fish and wild forage. Everyone was super happy. They had huge smiles on their face, full of energy. And then you go to a typical like American classroom with elementary schools, they're like depressed, all medically drugged out, don't want to be there under these like nasty fluorescent lights. It was just an interesting contrast to notice that.
Yeah, actually, for me, it's something I used to do all the time when I was younger, and go out into the wilderness and actually have those skills where I could actually forage for my food, make my shelter, make my fire, and become self-reliant And I think it's problem solving, learning skills, learning how to do it better. And it's something that sets you up for life. Then after school, you go out into the big, bad, real wilderness, not the comforting forest. And you've got the skills, you've got the mindset and skills to navigate it and problem solve, forage what you need, and get through the wilderness of civilization.
Yeah, and I think also it just teaches you how to live sustainably and more as a partnership with nature versus like nature working for you and then trying to extract as much as possible from her. There's that aspect as well.
Yeah, I think that's to me, that's a really important point, because we come from a culture that basically Judeo-Christian culture is that God gave us everything to use as we see fit. So we've always had this conquering nature mentality, extractive, when we've got to see actually we are part of nature and we've got to learn how to work with it. And if we, particularly at the moment, with all the issues we have on this planet, if we're going to survive, we really need to learn to work with nature, scale up nature, and acknowledge that we are part of it. And if we start wrecking nature, nature will wreck us.
Yeah. Well, Andre, thank you again for being on the show. It's good to connect, and honestly, thank you for continuing to speak out on these subjects. Again, it's so sad that we still have to have this conversation in 2024. It's not just obvious common knowledge, you know? In your opinion, what do you think? Is it kind of, do you see the wind shifting a little bit? For me, it's tough to tell because it kind of looks like some people, like 20% of people, especially after the whole, I'm not even going to say the word because I don't want to get this episode banned, but C word, you know, I think like 20% of people woke up and saw the silliest, the silly, unsustainable practices that a lot of countries have. But then 80% of people are still like just retarded.
Yeah. Well, you know, yeah, I see it exactly the same. The bulk are still for me, they're captured by the media, whether social media or mainstream media, and they just take in what they're fed. But the last few years, you know, we were fed a lot of stuff and we believed it, and then we learned we were lied to.
Mm-hmm.
And trust in governments and authority, so-called scientific experts, has evaporated. And I would say that's more than 20% now, and it's starting to get up into the 40s. People now are, more and more people are skeptical and of what they're being told by government. And we're seeing that across the board now, with the rise of a whole range of movements, particularly movements that are, you know, basically antagonistic to what their governments did to them.
Yeah. And my one, before we end this, I mean, my one honest question, the 80%, that's still kind of like asleep, or 80 or 60%, depending on how you look at it. And I know it's not going to make a difference because, like you mentioned, you know, a drug addict is going to want to be, you know, addicted to their drugs. It's the same when you're addicted to a mind virus that doesn't facilitate health conscious choices. They've already built a myriad of, as Walensky would say, lies that they believe as truths, and then they build more lies upon those truths, and then it's such a, you know, deep layer of kind of lies and pathology, which explains, you know, their obesity and various health issues. But my one question to them is like asking an honest question: if your belief system works so well, how come you're so sick? How come you're so overweight? How come you're always challenged with one symptom or another? You know, how come when you look in the mirror, you just see a person that's very inflamed, unattractive, et cetera, et cetera? If the belief system works so well, why are the results so poor? It's an honest question, you know?
Yeah, it's an honest question. And I think that the big issue here is we would look at what is the cause of it and remove the cause, change actions to reverse it. But they're basically, their belief system is, woe is me, poor me, look what's happened to me, and not things that I've done. And I'm going to the doctor, and he's or she is basically treating me for it. So, this is just the way it is. And that they normalize it. That's the world. That's the worldview. They feel very uncomfortable when you try to take them out of it. They don't want to listen. And if you say too much, they'll argue back, you'll lose friends. So, you just got to bite your lip about it and go on and do your own things, or do it the way we're doing now. We will do this podcast. Hopefully it gets out to more people. But a lot of times what we're doing is we're preaching to the converted.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying to get
that's basically who keeps listening to the shows. They already accept the message. There's no point of continuing to beat the hammer over the head, stuff of that sort. Yeah. But one funny thing before we close this out, Andre, is kind of like, I love how it's been normalized. Like, oh, obesity, it's nothing you can control. Is like in your DNA. I'm like, dude, where were the obese people before 1950?
Yeah.
Where were the obese people in the hunter-gatherer era? DNA hasn't even changed in the Homo sapien in like 200,000 years. I'm like, dude, this is like idiocy to the max.
Look at pictures of people on the beaches in the 1970s and 80s. Where's the obesity? This has really happened since the 1980s, when the tobacco companies started taking over the food companies and used their addiction model.
Yeah, and I love when people are like, oh, I can't lose weight even when I don't eat anything. I'm like, oh, that's great news. Then you can go get lost in the forest without any food, and you're not going to starve to death. Or better yet, if you can't lose weight at all, like, why even bother buying food? You can save a decent amount of money and time having to eat that. That's great. Then just stop buying food. Stop going to that fast food place if you can't lose weight without eating anything. Then that means you can just stop spending a 300% markup on a McDonald's burger that you can make for 300% less at home, like an equivalent burger. It's like so stupid. That's why I mentioned in the beginning of the show, it's normalized mental and physical illness. It's a mind virus. And mind viruses are like the most dangerous viruses on the planet. And they've killed more people than any other actual virus or war or conflict or natural disaster, and they also spread like viruses from one person to another. Notice that obese friends have obese friends and obese pets. It's like they even spread to other species. That's how vicious this mind virus is. Oh man, it's so sad because, again, they don't even see it as a problem. That's the saddest part.
I think the really important thing that we're doing, though, is consistently putting out solutions. And I think this is, and getting that information out that you can beat it, you can change it. These are curable. And the simple thing is, I'll say it again, remove the cause of harm. It's not rocket science. And it's common sense. What are the causes? Start removing them, and your body starts to heal. I'm I can say involved in the regenerative movement, and the whole issue of regeneration comes from in natural systems, ecosystems. You remove the cause of harm, the system will regenerate. Any ecosystem, you damage it, if you stop damaging it, it will naturally regenerate. And that is our body as an ecosystem as well. We stop damaging it, it will naturally regenerate. And we need to get that message across to empower people. Things don't have to be this way. We remove the harm, start putting in regenerative practices, healing practices like organic food, and we will see the health of our planet, us and our planet, change for the better.
And before I close out, Andre, I have one quote that actually reinforces exactly what you said, but I feel like a really good visual because everyone experienced this. And it's my friend Jator Pierre said, if you have a rock stuck inside your shoe, take the rock out and walk pain-free. Stop keeping the rock there while taking painkillers instead. So, Andre, again, I really appreciate what you've done over the years. You kind of laid the path for me to make the journey easier for me too, especially with your book, The Myths of Safe Pesticides. Although I grew up on an off-grid farm in Ukraine, when I came here, I just foolishly thought everyone farmed that way. I didn't even know they would spray all this stuff or what antibiotics were. I didn't even question it for so many years. I just thought maybe this is why America is so great. Look how much produce they have. That's all biodynamically raised. You're never going to get these quantities, on my grandma's ranch. So I really appreciate you. Please keep doing what you're doing. And thank you for what you do as well. Not an easy path, so I appreciate it. So
you too, Eugene, because it's so important to have podcasts that's like yourself putting out these messages. We need to keep the public informed. So thank you for what you do.
Cool. All right, guys. Thank you. And thank you, Andre. Have a good trip. In Germany, right?
Yeah, in Germany at the moment.
Cool. Great
They're
place.
home in a few days, fly home tomorrow. Okay, we'll catch up with you. Ciao.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks for tuning into the podcast. If you've ever had trouble losing weight, or you've lost weight, but still didn't have the ideal body or health you're aiming for, please feel free to reach out anytime and book an assessment. Eugene will work with you to cover your goals in detail, see what's holding you back, and go from there. In the meantime, feel free to check out the countless testimonials on Eugene's website in the link below. In the testimonial section, you'll notice everyone has various backgrounds, are of all different ages, and all have had different challenges in their life, but they all have one thing in common: they were all able to find their health and achieve their ideal body. You're also welcome to add yourself to the Facebook group in the link below. There you'll have access to the live videos that Eugene does weekly on Sundays, and other helpful content. Thank you again for tuning in.